Welcome to ActiveGraphs. In this session we'll be looking at the data types used by ActiveGraphs and how this affects the graphs that you're able to produce. Let's go ahead and open up a new file. The first thing you're presented with is whether or not there are column headers present in the file. Remember, this reads a comma-separated value file, simple table. If column headers are present, then you'd answer yes, and these will appear in the various graphs. You can use the default values of column 1, column 2, column 3, but it's better to have column headers present. In this case, there are column headers present, I know that. You're now presented with a choice of what data types to use for each of the columns. ActiveGraphs has chosen a default type. Let's look at one in particular. Year. Year is represented by a numeric representation. Down here, this is a percentage. Percentages are represented as numerics. Other things like the name of a person, in this case a lecturer or what we call a convener, are represented by categories. So these represent groupings of strings. In this case here, we can change this to string, but to leave it at categories is by far best. If we look at something else like year, year is represented by a numeric column, but it can actually be represented by an integer. If we use integer, this actually opens up a few more possibilities. There are other integers here that we should use. Semesters are actually a code, which is an integer, and also levels is really an integer. So let's go ahead and change these. We've now got our first graph up. Semesters long here, as we said, are integers. We're plotting, say, the pass rate. So this is representing the integers here. We have level 1 subjects, level 2 subjects, level 3, level 4, level 5. We can explore different types of graphs and different filtering capabilities. Let's look at the filtering capabilities of this. First, let's add a filter. Let's look at level. Because we have defined this as an integer, we will actually see it in this representation, because you can have a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, and a 5. Numerics are represented in a different way. Numerics are representing continuous information, and they are represented as a slider. So it's really a little bit up to you deciding which way you want to do it. Let's just open up this file again. This time we'll use the defaults. So we'll just see one simple difference here. Let's add a filter. Level. Now level is a slider here. So one of the differences that occurs when you choose a numeric versus an integer is that the integer is presented in a different way in filtering. Here it's much easier to say just give me the level 5 subjects represented over here. In the case of this one, we have to go and represent it in that fashion. Let's get the same graph up here, level. So the graphs look similar. Let me just turn off the label. The graphs are obviously similar, but the behavior of the filtering is slightly different. You'll see this also occurs in other types of graphs. When we go to a multi-bar chart, we are presented here with an option for level. So we can actually produce a diagram which has a level. Let's choose another one, campus, and then let's choose the pass rate and the average. So we can get a graph of that. Down here though, we have a graph, multi-bar chart. We don't actually have level. So certain graphs are only available to categorize data. The advantage of integer data is that it is both numeric and it's also categorical, and so it opens up more possibilities. Let's look at some other options. First of all, let's look at the visible data table. Across the top, you will see what data type has been assigned to the actual column. We reassigned the semester and the year to be integer, whereas we left things like the enrollment number as numeric. Now, in the data table, it matters little whether or not it's represented as an integer or a numeric. However, as you see up here, the graphs respond differently and the filters respond differently to the type of data. ActiveGraphs does make a guess at the type of data, however sometimes you want to override this. Let's look at categorical data a little bit more closely. First of all, we know things like the field here. Let's add a filter on field. These are the fields: ACC, ECO. This is accounting, economics, finance. These are represented across here in this graph. This will be representing ACC. This will be representing ECO. We can see that by labeling it with the actual field. There we go. Column full of ACCs, column full of ECOs. Each of the categories in the data are mapped against a number, so you can actually graph these. You can also graph other types of ones here, so level. In this particular case, we're only looking at level 5 subjects, so we're only getting points across here. If we set them all, we get a grid here showing where the data resides. Each of these has multiple points underneath it. That's why you're seeing a slight variation here. There's missing data across here. This is basically saying that for ITC there is a level 4 subjects, but in the other areas, accounting, economics, finance, there are no level 4 subjects. Let's look at some other possibilities here. Let's say we're looking at a scattergram where we're looking at field and the pass rates in each of the particular subjects. This is a scattergram, so each of the subjects represents a square. And it's actually coloured by something else. Let's just tidy this up a little bit. In fact, that's quite good. Let's look at that being the level. Okay. In this case, the level of red would represent the lowest values and blue is the highest values. How do we see that? Well, we just have to label by the value. Red representing 1, blue representing 5, green in the middle. Let's zoom in a little bit to see whether we can see this. Green representing 3, 2 is sort of a browny colour. Let's look at some other features of ActiveGraphs and how the data types can affect this. Let's look at a distribution histogram. And let's look at distribution histogram across the years. We have 4 years in the data set, and this is why it's categorical data. There are 2006 year, there are something like 200 odd, in fact 284 different subjects, 399, 484 and 540 different subjects. So this is looking at the data and producing a distribution histogram based on the elements and entries in those years. Let's look at a slightly different one here. Let's look at a distribution histogram of a numeric column. Now, a numeric column would be something like our passes. ActiveGraphs automatically bins the numerics into a range. You can control the number of bins that is used by using the settings and the number of bins. In this case, let's go for 20 bins rather than 10, which is the current. And let's look at the same graph again. We now have that graph, that data set, that column divided into a finer grain. In this session we're not exploring the types of graphs, but we are exploring the data types that occur in ActiveGraphs. And this shows you how you can work with numeric data which is across a categoric type graph.